Hey there, good evening and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and other forms of rock music. So this is our Wednesday night favorites, and this week I'm going to do something I don't do very often, which is a ranking. Primarily the reason I don't do any ranking is because I like to have all the albums and have had a chance to give them a fair shake and listen to before I rank them. And with most groups I don't have all the albums yet. Some of them I'm close to, but not 100%. This one I'm pretty close to, and the first album in his career, Peter Gabriel 1, I don't have it. I had it in album form originally, and then I had it in cassette, but I haven't been able to find it, and the stack's been sitting here for a while, so I decided, you know what, I know the album pretty good, so I'm just going to put it in the rankings. Okay, so for those of you who haven't figured it out already, we're going to be doing the ranking of the 7 studio albums by Peter Gabriel. Okay, he did do 2 other ones. One was called Scratch My Back, which was basically a covers album of different artists that he covered and did orchestral music with. I'm not going to do that album in the ranking. For the purpose of my rankings, I like to do original material, mostly original material, studio albums. So that one was pretty much similar to when I did the rankings of Rush. I didn't do the one where they did all the covers either. I can't think of it right now what it was. And then also we have the album New Blood, which is just orchestral recordings of some of his songs throughout his career. I didn't include that one either. So those 2 are not included in this ranking. For the purpose of the ranking, it's just the 7 studio albums that he released with original material. And so we're going to start by giving you the number. How I normally do this is I rank them from least favorite to most favorite. That doesn't necessarily mean they're bad albums. In the case of some it might mean that, but in this case it doesn't. Sorry. So and then I talk a little bit about each of the albums, and then give you my ranking. Then I'll give you the rankings in the proper order at the end, so that it's entirely covered. Okay, so with Peter Gabriel, he recently became a member of my newly formed group of 8. Up until I put him in, it was a group of 7, and had been that way since I put Jethro Tull in the group about 2006. So it would have been about 16 years since I changed it, and you know, he could have been in there a few years back from here, but I took my time and decided that this is as good a time as any to put him in, and he deserves to be there. So he is number 8 in my group of 8. But anyways, all that aside, I'm going to give you the rankings of Peter Gabriel's studio albums, and there are no other albums here. You won't see any of the live or compilations as well, so it's just the 7 studios. Okay, so we'll start with my least favorite. I think the problem with this album is that it's just really too new to me. I've had it for maybe 3-4 months. I've listened to it a few times. I'm not really warming up to it like I thought I would, and I don't want to leave it any longer, so we're going to go with this one. It's called Up. It's his last real studio album, released back in 2002, pending the new one that he's been talking about. I was hoping it would be out by now, but it hasn't. This would be number 7 of the 7 albums. Not a bad album, but I haven't warmed up to it enough to really give it a full ranking, so it's going to come in here at number 7. Okay, for number 6 will be the number 1 album, Peter Gabriel 1, or some people call it Car. I do not have that album. I've still been looking. Eventually I'll get it, but a decent album. Probably gets like a low 2, high 3 ranking for me. Of course, it has Salisbury Hill on it, so any album with that is going to get some kind of mention. So it's going to come in here at number 6. A pretty solid debut album for him in his solo career. This came out a couple years after he had left Genesis, or a year and a half. And I apologize again, my leg is really bugging me again. So anyways, there you got it. So number 6 is Peter Gabriel 1, or Car if you prefer. Okay, so number 5, big jump here. This is definitely a high 2 ranking for me. Coming in at number 5 is this album, Peter Gabriel 2, or Scratch. I love just about every track on here. In fact, I'm just going to go over the tracks just slightly here. I'm going to need my glasses because this might as well be written in chicken scratching for me. Yeah, so On the Air, DIY, and yeah, Mother of Violence. These are probably the 3 tracks I like the most. They are 1, 2, and 3 on the album. But I like A Wonderful Day in a One-Way World. I like White Shadow, Indigo, Animal Magic, Exposure, Flotsam and Jetsam, Perspective, and Home Sweet Home. There isn't a bad track on this album. They're all, at worst, they're good. At best, they're great. Album probably would rank higher if it was in another discography, but for here, because his discography is so good, it's going to come in the 5th spot as a high 2, bordering on a 1 here. So really good album. If you haven't listened to it, it's a little bit more, or I should say a little bit less synthetic sounding. I guess that's the best way to put it. It's not as production wise, sounds a little more raw, but still a great album. His second album, much better than his first album, I think. All the songs on here are classic, great songs. So there you have it, Peter Gabriel 2, or Scratch if you prefer. Okay, so now when we get now the top 4 albums are all like really good. We got 3 high 1s and then a masterpiece, in my opinion. So the next 3 albums, the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd album, they switch around periodically depending on which one I'm in the mood for, or which one's burned out. So the next one is probably a little bit more, I looked at them, a little bit more burned out than the one that's above it. But when it came out, this was my favorite Gabriel album when it came out, and stayed that way for quite a few years, probably 10 years or more before it was replaced by the one that came in number 1. So this is So, Peter Gabriel's So. Great album, lots of really good tracks on here. Red Rain, Sledgehammer, In Your Eyes, Big Time. These are all top shelf songs, Gabriel top shelf songs. And then you have like Don't Give Up, That Voice Again, Mercy Street. Mercy Street is, to me, one of the underrated deep cuts on this album. Really good song. This is The Picture, or Excellent Birds if you prefer. We Do What We're Told. Like there's no bad tracks on this album, but there's a little bit more of a split with this album than there was with Scratch. Now Scratch is pretty much all good songs from top to bottom, but no, and then a couple, 2 or 3 great songs. This one has like 4, maybe 4 or 5 great songs, and then the rest of them are okay or good. But there's a little bit more of a gap between the top and the middle, or the bottom, I should say, and no real songs in the middle. So it's a little bit lower and then a lot higher, and which is different than Scratch. I like all the songs quite a bit on here. at different periods of time. Sledgehammer is one of those songs that you've heard on the radio quite a bit. I actually I made a disc CD of me singing this song. Probably was a mistake. Peter Gabriel's voice is hard to do. It's just very hard. I've been trying for 40 years to get his voice right. I just can't quite get it. It's very difficult, but it's only made me appreciate him more. He's probably one of my 2 or 3 best vocalists of all time. So there you have it. So in the number 4 spot, barely though, beaten out barely by this one. You know, given whatever day of the week, this could have been 4th and it could have been 3rd. This was my first ever Gabriel album. I bought this when it came out. I even had the German version of the album, and for a long time that was the only one I would listen to. I liked the sound of it. I played it a lot. This is a really, really well put together album. Probably the first real jump in production was on this album, and there's a lot more kind of new, I don't know how you want to say it. It's almost like a synthetic synthesizer sound to it than there was on the predecessors. Rhythm of the Heat is one of his great tracks. San Jacinto's maybe the best song on this album. I Have the Touch, another great track. Family and the Fishing Net is one of those songs that I kind of like sometimes, but other times I don't really care for. Shock the Monkey, of course, was the one that got me into Peter Gabriel and was for a long time my favorite song by him. Lay Your Hands on Me, another good track. Wallflower and is okay, and then Kiss of Life is another really great track in the same vein as I Have the Touch. Both of them I like quite a bit. So it's got about 4 or 5 really top shelf songs here, and then you get a couple at the bottoms not that great, like they're okay. So this album is the split is a little bit bigger than it was on So you got more songs at the top than you got on So or on Gabriel 2, but then you have songs that are probably weaker than anything on either of those albums. So it's probably a bit more of a gap between the top and the bottom with this album. I like the cover quite a bit though. This may be it's one of the few, I think it may be the only album, it's the only one, well, the newest one doesn't have any pictures on it, but this is the only one with, I guess that's Peter Gabriel. I don't know. Or it's just a monkey, can't really tell. Anyways, great album. I love the production on the album. It was my favorite album when it first came out. And then So came along and I liked that one better. And then eventually, you know, it's just, eventually another album would come along. I always liked the newest one better for some reason with Gabriel. It's not always the case, but that. So then we come to the number 2 album, which was up until this one was my most recent album bought, or most recent album that I listened to. Got this about 4 years ago. Definitely a number 1, bordering on a masterpiece, this album. And I love every song on it. Pretty much, it's a very strong album. Not quite strong enough to get masterpiece yet, and so it's going to come in at number 2. Again, this album has a lot of really strong songs. Come Talk to Me, Love to Be Loved, Blood of Eden, and then you got the big one, Steam. I like that a lot too. Only Us, The Washing of the Water, Digging in the Dirt, of course, big hit on the album. 14 Black Paintings, Kiss the Frog is probably my second favorite, and Secret World. So there's about 5 or 6 songs on this album that are really strong songs, and then the songs that aren't as strong are still really good. So this album doesn't have as much of a gap between the top and bottom as the 3 previous ones. Has more the songs at the top or even with the songs at the top on those other albums, but the middle songs or the lower songs are much better than the ones on the at least on the last two anyways. So it gets a nod. It gets the nudge over the last two, mostly because it's the most recent of the album and the one that I've listened to the most over the last few years. So it just nudges out Security for number 2 spot. So that brings up the number 1, and this should come as no surprise, since if you've been following, you already know what's going to happen here. This album wasn't my favorite when I first heard it. It took a while to build for me. Because it was the only one where I went kind of backwards. So I started with Security, and then I went backwards for this one, number 2 and number 1. But this one I thought was going to be a little better than number 2, but not close to the newer ones that came out. But I've since grown to love it as a Peter Gabriel 3, or if you prefer, Melt. Easily the best song selection of all of the albums. There is no bad tracks on this album. At one time I would have said Family Snapshot would have been not really up to snuff here, but it's become one of my favorite tracks on the album. There's no bad like every single one here is a top shelf. Intruder has that great drum stuff at the beginning. No Self-Control, great tune. Start, another good one. I Don't Remember is probably one of the biggest tracks in Gabriel's career. Family Snapshot has really come up a long way for me. And Through the Wire, I always really liked that song a lot. And then Games Without Frontier is probably my favorite Gabriel song. Not One of Us is near that, close to that too. And then Lead a Normal Life, kind of a different track, but I've always really dug it. And then you have Biko. Biko, a track that always brings tears to my eyes, but a very strong track. At one time, it was probably my second favorite Gabriel song. It's lost a little bit over time, but so this album to me is near perfection. Pretty close to perfection. There's no bad tracks here. It's a masterpiece album, and just gets the number 1 nod here because of that. You know, it's pretty hard to go against it. It's such a great album. So I'm going to now give you the 1 through 7 in the reverse order. So number 3 is number 1. Us is number 2. Number 3 is Peter Gabriel's Security, and some people call this 4, but I never thought of it as that. I always, because it says Security right on it somewhere. Well, maybe it doesn't. Okay, that's why they do it. And they call it 4 because it doesn't say that on it. Although I do think it says it on the side. Yes, it says on the side, Security. So Security comes in at number 3. So comes in at number 4. Peter Gabriel 2, or Scratch, last release in the 70s, comes out in at number 5. Peter Gabriel 1, 1976 release, comes, or Car if you prefer, comes in at number 6. And then the most recent one, which is called Up, it says right there, Up, comes in at number 7. In fairness to this album, I haven't ranked it yet. I'm still waiting for it to take off. I haven't had a Gabriel album that I've gotten that hasn't taken off, so it's going to take off at some point. And then who knows where it'll end up if I do the ranking again someday. And I'm hoping that he has a new one coming out. I hope it comes out. I would love. I've been desperately waiting for something from him for a long time. I mean, I got my plays live, and I like some of his live stuff quite a bit too. But studio albums are great, and I love Peter Gabriel. So there you have it. My rankings of Peter Gabriel. Let me know what your rankings are. How do you feel about these albums? How do they rate to you? I mean, for me, the top 5 albums are all like really good. Number 1's a little bit less than them, and then the new one really isn't rated yet, so it doesn't get as much of a feel. And then I didn't do the other 2, which was Scratch My Back and New Blood, because for the reasons I stated earlier. So please like and subscribe. I much appreciate it. Let me know what your favorites are, and we'll be back next week with another favorites. So have yourself a good night.